going through is hermeneutics, all right? Big fancy word. Anybody in here and have no idea what hermeneutics is before you saw this up here? All right, hey, we got one. Yes, hermeneutics. I was introduced first to the idea of hermeneutics when I was a kid. And you might be wondering, how does that even work? Well, my dad was a preacher, and he was a missionary, went to India every other year. And eventually the laws started to change in India so that they really didn't want Christian ministers coming in. And so, if you put on your passport, for your visa to go over, you put minister, or I'm going over to preach or evangelize. I mean, that's an automatic no. But you gotta go preach. And so, whenever you believe, that people need to hear, then yeah, you're gonna go over. And so Dad just put down teacher for his visa. And of course that's gonna ask questions. And so he would have, the people at the, customs agency, they'd say, so what are you a teacher of? And Dad went, hermeneutics. And they went, oh, okay, go on ahead. So Dad would use that as a joke, but he really did do that. That's how he was able to get into India so many times. And I think that it's because of that weird word that I learned as a kid that I actually developed this interest in it in parallel. The topic is, without a doubt, my favorite non-biblical study whenever it comes to theology, the study of God. I love it whenever we're looking at a book of the Bible or we dive into a topic. But if we're getting like a step out, this is my favorite topic. This is because I enjoy understanding or studying and trying to understand why things are the way they are. I enjoyed my art classes where we would look at Degas' ballerinas, and we would have to look at it in 2D design. We would try to draw lines to see how his paintings drew in your eyes and your focus into one thing. It was, okay, yeah, you look at a pretty picture, and yeah, it's a pretty picture, but there's a whole lot of like mechanics that are going on behind it that make it so interesting. And this is how it works with communication, and especially with the Bible. So I'm gonna just today and next week kind of give you an overview of what this discussion is all about. We are not using our Bibles today. We will get to the point where we will be using our Bibles a lot, but we're laying the groundwork to start off with. So So let's talk about the introduction and the foundations of belief. Let's see if I can get the clicker to work. There we go. All right. So hermeneutics, if you want a fancy word for it, if you want to use the fancy word for the class, hermeneutics, it is the science and the art of interpretation. Interpretation really is the key word here. And as I put on the bottom, if you want to describe this class and just call it a class on interpretation, boom, that's what it is. They just have to have a fancy word for this. I've got a note on the fancy words here on the next slide, so just giving you a heads up. But the name comes from Hermes, which if you ever read any of your Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Hermes was who was he?
Messenger of the gods.
He was the messenger of the gods, yes. Yeah. Answers are right there. That's good. But yeah, he was the messenger for the gods. And so he would, according to those stories, he would hear the message from the gods and then he would deliver that. And so the word ends up meaning the word explain, or in the case of the Bible, it's used as the word translation in 3 different times whenever that word is in the New Testament. We often use the word to mean interpretation, and it's the study. Now, it says that it's a science and an art. What's the difference between a science and an art when you're describing something?
Hardline rules versus a little bit of judgment.
Yes, all right, that's actually a perfect way to say that. If it was just the science, then we're just talking about a list of rules, all right? If anybody follows the rules, then perfect. And an art, on the other hand, is that there's a little bit of personal element to it, a little bit. Has anybody here studied a foreign language? All right, what languages? I'm curious. Spanish? French? Latin. Oh, I took Latin in high school too.
Arabic?
I don't remember any of it. What is it?
Arabic.
Did you study Arabic?
Yeah, for 2 semesters.
Really? Wow. Okay.
It's very interesting.
Well, you
It's
guys.
similar to Hebrew, actually.
I don't doubt it.
No.
But as you get into languages, I don't know how far you guys have gotten into it. Anybody like substantially far?
I have a bachelor's degree.
Okay, so fluent. All right, in Spanish.
No, not fluent, but yes.
Okay.
It's been a while since, it's been 20-some years, so.
So whenever you are listening to somebody speak in Spanish, if we've got a Hispanic person here talking, and you are trying to translate for the rest of us that don't know Spanish, no hablo francés. If you are translating for us, do you need to just repeat every word that they say?
No, because it wouldn't make sense.
Why not?
Because the way the language is arranged is different.
Oh.
So like, for example, an adjective for English would come before the noun. In Spanish, it would come after the noun.
Okay. So you can't just follow strict scientific rules of one-to-one parallel. There's a bit of an element, there's a little bit of an art to it. You got to finagle it to try to make it appropriate for this.
Yeah.
But could you still faithfully translate that to another? Even if it's not one-to-one on paper? Yeah, it's still the same thing. All right? Yes?
There's also all kinds of, phrases that we throw out that are really culturally driven.
Yes.
That, wouldn't make sense to somebody living across the world.
Yes. We will get into some of those examples in the Bible. Probably one of the best examples I use is in Acts 17, where Paul is in Athens, and he's going around and he's preaching, and then the people on Mars Hill, they hear about this, and they're like, this guy's teaching something strange, we want to hear about it. In Greek, it says, what's this seed picker doing? And it's seed picker, and it's like, if you just translated the Bible as seed picker, we would be like, what's a seed picker? Well, that was an idiom. That was a phrase that they use for, as it's translated in most English Bibles, as idle babbler, or he's just got a lot of different things that he's picking up. So you can't just translate things, butterfly. Okay, now you're thinking about a stick of butter. No. Sometimes you have to put in a little bit of an art to understand something. So, this study could just be as simple as a list of rules. All right, I could just hand you out a list of rules that people generally agree upon for how to interpret the Bible, and we could be done. But I got to tell you, out of context, it's not nearly as full as what it can be. Whenever you look at a meta look at how we understand the Bible, it will help you become a fuller, more nuanced studier of the Bible. But this doesn't just actually apply to the Bible. Hermeneutics is understanding any text of any form. As an example, the U.S. Constitution. All right, let's take the First Amendment as an example. All right, what does the First Amendment say? Freedom of speech. Okay. Yet you've got issues that will go to in my lifetime it was illegal to burn the flag, but then that got canceled out. Why can you burn the flag now?
Freedom of speech.
That's freedom of speech. All right, but it wasn't always said. It doesn't say freedom of speech in the Constitution in the first one, but they have interpreted it to mean that. Doesn't mean that we have to agree with it, but it means that there are judges that will read the Constitution or the laws, and then they will vote and they'll say on how this thing should be interpreted. There's two major schools or major camps when it comes to understanding the Constitution, and actually is very similar to the Bible too. Have you guys ever heard the expression living document? All right, what do they mean whenever they say that the Constitution is a living document?
Changes.
It changes based on what?
time.
Yeah, all right. We're going to adjust this with time, and well, they didn't have, flags for everybody to stomp on. A better example would be things like, threats. Well, actually, the Second Amendment is the one that's more often brought up because people will say, yeah, I've heard as an example before about the Second Amendment. Well, they didn't have semi-automatics back in the day. They only had single shots, so therefore that shouldn't apply for today. And yet people say, wait a second. But there's also people that'll say, hey, they didn't have the internet. They never knew about the instantaneous communication of the internet, so we should not have the First Amendment apply to the internet. There is an element to, we want to understand what they meant when it was first written. There's also this philosophy of this thing continues to be understood in a new context. Now, what the Constitution, personally, I don't care. But when it comes to the Bible, I absolutely care, because I believe that the Bible sets forth the argument that it is to be understood in its context, but we apply it today, but we can't change its words. There are people that disagree with this, and that's what we're going to get into. So before we get into muddy waters, right? Before we get into any of the muddy waters here, remember that interpretation is generally something that you do without realizing it. All right? In this class, have you had to stop at any moment and say, okay, now what is he actually meaning when he says this? Like, is he talking in a fable? Like, is there some sort of a moral to a lesson? You're not wondering that. Normally, interpretation is something that we just do, and we don't have to think about it because it's just life. We understand that way. But it's only when there's some sort of an obstacle, something that gets in the way, that we have to stop and we go, whoa, wait a second. I need to go back and I need to look at this on a higher level. We're going to look at some of those obstacles too, but we mentioned one already with a foreign language. If somebody's speaking in a different language, you can't just sit and listen. That's not an automatic thing. I literally don't know what you're saying. So you have to take a step back, find a way to translate it, and then you work with it from there. Does that make sense? Ish? Thoughts and questions so far? And you can be honest. Why did I choose this class?
I think in today's society, we're tasked with trying to understand to a deeper level what people are really saying or what they really mean.
Yes.
So, rather than taking things at face value, people, they say something, they mean exactly what they said, and it's no different. Today, I think people have all kinds of different meanings behind things. They say things differently, and you go back to you really sometimes have to stop and think, what did I just hear?
Yes.
Before responding to providing somebody an answer or a thought to what they might be asking.
And you get into bigger things like on the internet, like memes and all of these goofy videos and pictures that people will use. Like an image can have a completely different meaning than just the image, because culturally that's tied in with, okay, well, this is some goofy subculture or something. It's bizarre. Communication can be bizarre sometimes, but it can also be really straightforward.
I think you got to know who you're dealing with, and you need to know the person, and you need to, because otherwise there's a lot of hidden meanings out there, particularly with these short sentences that are now traded back and forth across the internet.
All the acronyms and stuff?
Yeah.
I was thinking more like whenever you message your spouse or if somebody's dating somebody and they just say, sure, period. Okay. If your wife or girlfriend says the word sure with the period, all right, does she mean sure? Does she mean like, sure, I'm angry? There's so many different things that this could mean. But yes, no, this is something that we do all the time. We just don't think about it, which is why I think this class is so important, is because you're learning to decode how we think about these things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that, you know, I'm thinking about is just how we can look at things like within context.
Yes.
And just knowing kind of like what is going on when whatever statement is being said, because somebody could say something and then you could quote it like, all right, don't do this, but maybe something was going on as to why they're saying, yeah, don't do that. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to, and just seeing how then I can, like, you know, apply that in my life. So then when I talk to some of my friends and they have questions, I can be like, all right, here's the context behind that, and here's why this is that.
You coming to the word context is proof. I've not used the word context yet, I don't think. Did I have one time?
Like once.
Shoot, man.
I think somebody else brought it up.
No. Okay. But the point is, context is probably the most essential one ever. You know, I am judging what you're saying based on what you're saying right now, not something that I had heard, 20 minutes ago. You have to look at the meaning of what is it right now. And then if that doesn't give enough, understanding, then you go back, you look further. Those are some of the rules that we do automatically, but we also need to apply when it comes to the Bible. Bob and then Erica.
Where do you go?
Well, I saw your hand first, so.
Sorry.
Yeah, Erica.
I just had this thought about some people's misunderstanding of the Bible and putting things on Facebook or social media from the Old Testament.
Yes.
And you're kind of like, no, Jesus came and they shall have the law.
Yes, that is, we're going to look at examples for that. So the first half of this class, basically the first 7 weeks or whatever, will be kind of a background, and I'll give examples. Starting next week, I'll give you guys little examples to think about. But the second half is all practice. I'm going to have examples, and it's going to be an open class where you can sit down, and based on the things that we've talked about, I'll give you a passage or a Facebook post that somebody has said.
Take one thing out of the Old Testament and be like, you hypocrite.
Yes, yeah.
Like to do on Facebook.
Yes, people misusing the Bible in one way or another, and then trying to figure out what's going wrong, like what's wrong with this. What are they failing to understand to come to that error? So we're just learning big picture stuff. Does that make sense? Bob? No?
Yeah, so I was gonna piggyback off of what Brock said with context.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, the older I get, the more stuff I have going on in my life, the harder it is for me to just like figure out the context of certain things. Like, especially, I feel like the more my mom texts me, the less I understand what she's talking about.
Okay.
She'll just hit me with something, and it'd take me a half an hour to figure out. And finally, I'll go, oh shoot, are you talking about what we said yesterday, or whatever, but it's interesting to me, like I almost feel like I go through phases of like being more and less skilled at like seeing the context of things like at face value. And so just, I guess it's a warning to myself to, not just assume anything as I'm looking at it, but I have to actually like put in the work to like force myself to try to figure out what the context really is.
Assumptions are a big part of all of this. And part of this is to make ourselves aware of our own assumptions. We'll get into it in 2 or 3 weeks. We'll look at a history of interpretation, because believe it or not, the way that we see the Bible interpreted today, some of those things are very new. Not the ones that we see here, but there are out there. Whenever I worked at the hospital and was in the chaplaincy department, it was interdenominational, and I worked with people that I had no earthly idea where they were coming from. And that's maybe another reason why this class is so important to me, is because interacting with those folks, they were on a completely different page than I was. But if you look at the history of where their beliefs came from, it actually is only about 100 years old, max. Whereas the idea of viewing the Bible as as literally to be understood, but we have to understand what the word literally means too, because that's another issue. But to understand that it is true, that idea goes back to Jesus. And Jesus will be the model for our hermeneutic. Jesus is the example that we will use where how he interpreted the Old Testament is how we should interpret the Bible itself. That is the goal, all right, that we're trying to get at. But there are people that would disagree with that. And, okay, as an example, just as a side point, I know this won't make as much sense to you here just because first time in here. In the Church of Christ universities, as a college minister, I talk with our students that are here and have traveled away to them. I have had multiple people that have gone down to Harding that have come back and they have had very crazy questions and problems based on the things that their Bible teachers have been teaching them. So you'll hear statements. I had one of them that said, well, you can't really understand, how they were writing that. They were writing it in a different way, in a different culture. That's not, you can't actually understand what they mean. All right, or that's not actually supposed to be something you're supposed to follow. They were just writing stories. It's from Harding, okay? And yet people still extol it. Hey, there we go. No, that is the kind of stuff that we are facing. And so finding a good reason why we believe what we believe, and you can say, no, here's the line, that helps. Let me, so before I do that, think about thinking. Yes, I am very painfully aware. This class will involve, it's kind of a broad thing, and on Wednesday night, that's kind of exhausting. My goal is to try to make it as accessible and fun as possible. I hope that my own excitement can maybe help you guys out if you're like, oh, it's been a long day, because I get it. So why study hermeneutics? Well, I just explained one, but we'll look at a couple here. Number one, there is a tremendous amount of division in Christianity. There are 30,000 different types of religious groups that claim to be Christian. If you read in the book of John, chapter 17, Jesus said before he, this is the high priestly prayer. This is the prayer that he prayed before he was betrayed and crucified. Jesus said, I pray for not just the apostles, all right, for these, but for those that will believe because of them. Let's talk about people today. He says that they may all be one, just as you and I are one, that they may be all together. Unity was one of the last things that Jesus in the flesh called for. And yet, Christianity today is a joke. 30,000 different denominations exist. Alexander Campbell, all right, he was one of the pioneers of the Reformation movement. The idea of everybody's divided because of all of these creeds. It's like, hey, if you want to be part of me, you have to say this statement and say, I agree with that. Oh, you don't agree with that? Then we can't be together. And Alexander Campbell and a lot of people said, those lists of the creed, that's not in the Bible. Why are we doing this? Here's some quotes from Alexander Campbell about this. It says, all the differences in religious opinion and sentiment among those who acknowledge the Bible, so all the differences of people that believe that the Bible is true, are occasioned by false principles of interpretation or by a misapplication of true principles. He's saying that for the people that do believe that the Bible is from God, he says the reason why that there are divisions are because people are using interpretation improperly, or they know the rules and they're not applying it properly. All right? That explains why we've got 30,000 different ones here. He said also, and this is all in Principles of Biblical Interpretation, a book written back in the 1800s. It's actually pretty good. It still holds up. He says, were all students of the Bible taught to apply the same rules of interpretation to its pages, there would be a greater uniformity in opinion and sentiment than ever resulted from a simple adoption of any written creed. Now, that statement doesn't carry as much weight for us today because creeds are not really anything that's done in Christianity anymore. Like That's like for the pastors and stuff to do. But that was really bad in the 1800s. That's every little church had their own little creed. And he said, you know what? If everybody just stopped and learned how to read the Bible and thought about it and was consistent with it, we wouldn't have all these divisions. And I am one to agree with him. So I saw a hand. Bob.
Yeah, just a throwaway comment. I've heard this before about the number of different groups and reference to division in Christianity. I guess I sincerely hope that amongst those 30,000 denominations that there are many overlaps. You know what I mean? Like
there's tons of overlap.
Like in terms of like that's not 30,000 different sets of beliefs, but that maybe, for example, somewhere across the world they don't identify with this other group, but they basically believe the same thing. And
To a large degree, that is the case.
Crossing my fingers that there's a good chunk in there like that.
Most of them, not most, a large number of that is in my home state of West Virginia. Because down in the hollers, there are unique little offshoots of main denominations. There's a lot of charismatic, like snake handling churches and stuff, that they don't affiliate with anything else beyond them. So it's kind of geographic. But yeah, I'm sure that if you actually put all, like a representative from all 30,000 in a room, that number would drastically lower. But it doesn't change the fact that there's still an obscene amount of division. And God never wanted it that way. Why would Jesus say, I want you all to be one? You know, if he's not giving us a way to be all one, you know? Why study hermeneutics? Why study interpretation? So that you can explain why you believe what you believe. All right. If people ask you, well, why do you believe that? They'll be, oh, that's just your interpretation. Okay, well, I can tell you why that's my interpretation, and you can explain why you believe what you believe. You can say, well, context. You look right here at the passage right before it. It's going to give you a clue as to why this is the case. Some of these things you're not going to be able to understand because none of us are going to be all experts in Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic and like archaeologists of biblical culture. There's an element where we're going to have to rely on the credibility of people in their fields to be able to take that and carry that. By the way, that is a human problem. That is not a Bible problem. Every single one of us will have to depend upon the work and the research of people that have come before us. That is okay. But you also want to make sure that you choose your sources like wisely and be smart about it. But we need to explain why we believe what we believe. To put religious error into perspective and give it a name. There's a book called Verbal Judo that back when I was a teacher I read. It was written from the perspective of a cop. It was a book on police management, but on generating voluntary compliance. Like how do you get people to agree with you? And okay, that's a whole other thing. But the point that I thought was interesting about it is he said, I have to watch out because there are certain things that people do that will automatically make me mad. So this author said he hates it when people said, well, why? And he's like, you know what? He said he just had to describe it and just say, this is a why person. This is just somebody saying why. Put a name to it, acknowledge it, and then go on. Don't get mad. Don't get frustrated. You've got a name for it. You can put it over there.
Also known as toddlers.
Yes. Yes. And I do have a problem with the constant.
They know what buttons to push.
They do indeed know what buttons to push. But there is something so valuable in being able to put a name to something that is wrong. Personally, I can't speak for everybody, but there have been times that I have heard or read an opinion on something and I get mad. And I look at it and I think, well, why am I mad? Sometimes I'm mad because what is being described is just heinously wrong, evil, immoral, something like that. Sometimes I get mad because I don't understand it. Because what if that's right? What if somebody is right and they're saying something that is totally different from what I believe? And so that's why it's wise to learn how to look at other views, come to a better understanding of it, to be able to name it, so that you can say, all right, you know what? That part of what they're saying might be something I can learn from. Or you can say, you know what, that's just hogwash. And you can just dismiss it outright. We'll look at examples. To understand our own limits. All right. Anybody that thinks that, I understand everything all right, I just read the Bible, it just says what it says, and that's what it is. Yes, that is true, but we have our own understandings that we come to the table with. Now, there is a massive division in interpretation in today's culture over whether you can separate out your personal views from anything else that you understand. Personally, I am of the belief that, yes, I have my own background that I bring to the table whenever I am listening to somebody else or reading something, reading the Bible. But there are some people that say that it is impossible for you to prioritize what it says over your own background. You will forever color it, and you will mar it, and you'll never fully understand it because you're looking at it through biased eyes. I believe that, yes, we have biases from our background, but I disagree that they are impossible to overcome. I believe that it's wise to stop and to look, okay, why am I thinking it's this way? There are certain assumptions that we might bring to the Bible that we'll think, well, it's this way. An example, some people have thought, whenever Jesus talks about in heaven being married, passage in one of the Gospels, and the Sadducees try to trick Jesus and say, all right, let's say a woman marries a guy, he dies, she marries his brother, 7 brothers. Whose husband is she going to have when she's in heaven? And Jesus answered that, and he said, people are neither married nor given into marriage in heaven, but are like the angels in heaven. I have heard, and even I think maybe myself assumed, that means that there's no gender, there's no male or female, boy or girl in heaven. It's just kind of like this androgynous existence. Like, I don't know where I ever got that idea from, but you go and you look at the Bible, there's nothing about that there. It just says they're not going to be married. That has nothing to do with whether you're going to be still a boy or a girl in heaven. Just not going to be married. Do you see what I mean by that? I am bringing something to the table, and that is messing up my reading. But the point is that I learn about it, and I go, oh, yeah, that's incorrect. And I throw that old idea away, and I pick up with what is correct. Yeah.
Well, what you learn, and especially if you try to bring that as a part of your life and bring it to bear, whatever, those become part of your history that you're bringing with you.
Yes, very smart, absolutely. Bob is saying that if we're talking about what we're bringing to the table, whenever we learn something new, that's still part of what we're bringing to the table in the future, that we have learned things. So I don't have this fatalistic, terrible, like we are stuck in our ways kind of perspective. I believe that we can learn, we can grow. And if not, then what's the point? Lastly, so learn how easy it is to understand the Bible. Why do we study interpretation? Because I want you guys to know it really is easy to understand the Bible. Now, if you are coming into this class thinking it's already easy to understand, don't lose that. But there are some parts that are hard to understand. My mom has brought up many times, she's like, the Bible's written in such a way that even a 3rd grader could understand it. I agree. I also disagree in some ways because I read John chapter 6, where the people came up to Jesus and they said, hey, you can make bread out of thin air. We want you to be king. And Jesus went, no, you're actually going to have to eat my body. I am the living bread. You need to eat me. And they went, what are you talking about? And he's like, yep. Oh, actually, you got to drink my blood too. And they're like, what are you talking about? And at the end of John 6, many people divided and left from Jesus because they didn't understand that he was speaking spiritually figurative. There are parts to the Bible that are hard to understand. Peter says as much in 2 Peter, talking about Paul. He's like, the writings of Paul, there's some things in it that are hard to understand, which people will twist and pervert to their own ends. The Bible is easy to understand, but there are some things in it that are hard to understand. Being able to tell why some things are easy and why some things are hard will help you become a better Bible student. That make sense? All right. Here's what I got here. Important reminders here. Well, this is where we'll finish here. Important reminders. There's going to be a lot of like technical words and stuff that are brought up. Don't worry about that. I will immediately try to follow that up with a simple word for it. A lot of this is I'm trying to translate stuff that like this. There's a lot of snotty-nosed people that are studying this stuff, and I'm trying to take that and trying to present it to everybody because. Devil Wears Prada. You guys ever watch Devil Wears Prada? Nobody? Am I the... Oh, okay.
No.
It's actually a decent movie. There's a scene where Anne Hathaway's character, she's working in this fashion, like high-end fashion place, and the devil who wears Prada, it's not an actual devil, but she notices that Anne Hathaway's character is kind of scoffing, and is thinking how ridiculous and how high fashion and separated they are. And the lady then just said, "You're wearing this that's from JCPenney's." You know, she's saying it in a mean way. She's like, "You're wearing that from JCPenney's, which was based off of this fashion thing that was introduced 3 years ago, which was a result of this, which we had in this place 5 years ago." And the lady's like, "Oh." And she kind of has this realization that even though it's way far off, it does have an impact on everybody's life. You just don't realize it, which is why I say this. People that have these weird extreme views on interpretation, they are very influential. There's a reason why there's 30,000 different types of denominations. There's a reason why the Methodist Church in the last 2 years has split into two. There's now the Methodist Church of America and the Methodist Church for the rest of the world, because they disagreed over interpretation on marriage. So those that are taking the interpretation of the American group have a much more liberal view of interpretation compared to the rest of the world. And so they're very loud, very vocal. It's impacting people around us, but it's really just a few people. They're just really loud and obnoxious. Those who carry in extreme views of interpretation, it's unsustainable. What will happen is if people have loony views of interpretation, they will eventually give up on Christianity as a whole. As far as college ministry is concerned, people that maintain their faithfulness, whether if they were raised in the church and then they go to college, if they go to a state school or anywhere, it turns out that if they grow up in a really oppressive environment, like an anti-church of some sort, they will usually just give up faith altogether. Like they just don't go to church anywhere at all. But if they go to a church that says nothing really matters, you can just go to wherever you want, they go to a church that's more fun. And honestly, there are a lot more fun places because they have interpreted the Bible in such a way that nothing matters, just have fun with it. And if that's the case, then why bother staying where you're at? I know the bell rang. Just don't try to understand the error. We're going to bring up error. Don't try to understand it. Error doesn't have to make sense. Truth has to make sense. Error, by definition, does not have to make sense. And lastly, learning to identify an error can help you avoid it in the future. Okay? So that is a good basics for what we'll be talking about